The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam, brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acomb. We're broadcasting from the Hesselson studio, and joining me in the studio this morning, Senator Tom O'Mara. Tom, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Frank. It's great to be with you.
Well, I really do appreciate you being on the show because there's so much going on. I'm surprised you found the time. I don't even know where to begin, but I've got to say, and we've heard from so many viewers, you did such a great job at the Albany rally for the COs.
Yeah, well, see, this is an untenable situation that's been brewing for years. Something that I've been outspoken on for years. It's really, this particular is because really the HALT Act and the prisons, but this all is a culmination of the beginning with the defund the police movements, with one-party control in Albany that followed the 2018 elections when we Republicans lost the Senate majority in Albany. And the very next year, it came out with bail reform, no bail, discovery, all these other things that have gone on. And then, 2 years after that was the HALT Act that got put into place. And we've just had a complete lack of discipline within our prisons, behind the walls. And these men and women are working, as I said at the rally this week, probably the dirtiest, nastiest, and most dangerous jobs in law enforcement. They're unarmed, and they're dealing with the worst of the worst inmates that are not subject to discipline these days. So there is nothing holding them back from the assaults. The increase in assaults in the last couple years since HALT was implemented, it's nearly 100% increase of inmate-on-inmate assaults, and about a 60% increase of inmate-on-staff assaults. So it's not safe for the other inmates in there with these dangerous ones that are out of control, and it's certainly not safe for the officers. We've seen too many very significant injuries on the line of duty works, but I really feel for these men and women in this condition. It's an untenable situation. The Taylor Act complicates it a lot because the union leadership is not engaged. So just communicating with picket lines over 40-some prison facilities around the state and trying to get a unified position or message on something has been very difficult for these guys. And the governor's playing hardball. Department of Corrections is playing hardball. So some really harsh stuff has been done. Not just the firings and the dropping of health care coverage, but I think the most untenable thing I saw was this week when they came out and said, yeah, your health care is terminated. And I get it. The Taylor Act is tough. Don't get me wrong. It's tough. But to come out and say, we're canceling your health insurance and we're going to deny you COBRA. That you can't even go and pay for the continuation of your benefits is outrageous.
And I know we have the sheriff, Jim Allard from Steuben County, and he talked about it being an act of desperation. And it's true, when they started protesting, it's probably the coldest week that we've had all year. When's the last time you saw a burning barrel, by the way?
I've stood by a few over the last couple of weeks now with these guys, and they had a great showing in Albany. And that was a little warmer the day in Albany than the days I was on the picket line in Elmira, but it is not a strike of convenience for them by any means. This is desperation for sure. This is because their complaints, and frankly, my advocacy and my Republican colleagues' advocacy on this for 3 years now, it's just fallen on deaf ears with the administration, and they felt they had no choice because of the dangerous working conditions behind the walls, and they are dangerous.
And that's why I've been so proud, and I mentioned it on the show before, proud to have you on, Phil Palmisano, Chris Friend, because people watching the show actually knew what the HALT Act is before the news broke. Because we've talked about you specifically, and Phil talked about it for so long.
Look, we warned about it before they passed it.
That's right.
And
same with bail reform.
Was going to come. Same with bail reform. Same with discovery reform. Now, on discovery reform, it's somewhere between 25 and 30% of all criminal cases are being dismissed on technicalities. Nothing to do with the merits of the case, because some piece of discovery, no matter how irrelevant it was, these cases are being dismissed. Where's where's justice for the crime victims in these cases? They're an afterthought. It's all thought in doing everything for the criminal in this state, and it has been for 6 years of one-party control.
And it's the same with bail reform. When you think of how many victims didn't need to be victims because of this law.
Yeah.
Everybody's life has been touched by bail reform in one way or another.
The repeat offenses from somebody that would not have been out there, and it's led to a degradation of society as a whole, major frustration of the general law-abiding citizenry, seeing what's going on. It's inexplicable.
Right. And to go back to the HALT Act, I know obviously that's the main argument in the strike, but I can't believe it's even legal with the overtime they are being forced to take.
Well, I posted up on my social media last week one of the final budget hearings, which we'll get to the budget in a minute, I think, when we're talking about. We went through a month of budget hearings and different topics every day, but Department of Labor was the second to last day of budget hearings. So the Commissioner of Labor is on there with the governor's head of employee relations on the same panel, and we're like, how would this be acceptable in any other business? You'd be in there all over them, and yet you're looking the other way. And they kept raising, well, it's a docs issue. It's a docs issue. We're like, you any other corporation or business entity, you would have been jumping down their throat, requiring mandatory 2 overtime shifts a week.
Right.
And that's the best case scenario.
Right.
These guys were getting stuck 24 plus hours, 36 hours, and multiple times during a pay period. Never getting home to see their families, never know when they're going to get home. It's 2 weeks ago we had a big group of spouses and some kids that came up to Albany to advocate on this strike issue, just how bad it was. And it was very effective. It's some moving stories just on how detrimental this has been to their family life.
There's been so many powerful signs that I've seen, but I think the most powerful one was that the prisoners get to see their families more than we do.
Yeah,
it's true.
And that's a fact. And they know when they're going to get to see their families.
Yeah, well, that's true.
And the CEO's families don't, because you didn't know when how many shifts you were going to get stuck in a row. Look, this has been festering for a long time. The staffing shortage has been festering for a long time. They're really asking for reasonable accommodations on the HALT Act, so that when the staffing isn't there, they don't have to go through it. Because I've been in the facilities. I've been in 5 Points. I've been in Elmira under the HALT Act to provide the programming that's required for the most assaultive and most dangerous inmates in there. They've got to move these inmates individually, 3 officers on 1 inmate, to get them from their cell to programming, which is a class or whatever it might be. They have to shackle them to the desk so they can't reach another inmate or a staff person. And when there's not staff around to do that, I mean, they get better accommodations and treatment and opportunities for tablets. And they can make phone calls to their families on these tablets. They get more time with that when they're in this segregation than they do when they're not. So there's a benefit to being in that, but it's an untenable situation.
Hasn't it been amazing, the outpouring from the community? Those guys are eating good out in the cold.
Yeah, those guys. It was great. We were able to send a whole bunch of pizzas over one day to Elmira. We did with Assemblyman Palmisano and Assemblyman Gallahan up at 5 Points, barbecue and hot dogs one day for them up there. So it's been great to be able to show that support for these guys. They deserve it. And this is not going to end well.
No,
it's not going to end well for the officers. It's not going to end well for the governor, for the state, for Department of Corrections. It's a terrible situation. Something really needs to be done here to provide safe working conditions. That's what brought this on, and that's what's got to come of it. But the hardball that the state is playing right now is very disconcerting to see. It's a very serious situation, and it is. And we got to get these men and women back to work. But something's got to give here.
Think about the optics too with Governor Hochul and how she's handled the corrections officers, saying just last week she didn't even know what their issues were, which I thought was very disrespectful from what was happening. But then we see the optics of her having a roundtable with federal workers that were laid off from DOJ. To me, that you couldn't have worse optics when it comes to the actual residents of New York State.
I agree completely with you, Frank. It's frustrating to see that kind of double standard. But as I mentioned earlier, the Taylor Law does complicate things for sure. But there should be more interest on the administration's part in really trying to resolve these issues than just trying to strong arm what is clearly a movement based on a need for safe working conditions. I can't tell you how many bills have passed the legislature in the past 5 years regarding workplace safety.
Right.
Every year.
I know.
Probably a half a dozen of them.
I know.
And look, for the governor to say, I don't know,
what the issues are.
Well, they've been hearing from me and from my Republican colleagues for 3 straight years on what the issues are. Now, I mean, she retracted a little bit and say, well, I don't know exactly what it's going to take to get them to come back in, which maybe that you're threading the needle there, but I could tell you a couple things that I think could very easily be done and satisfy them to come back in. There's, as we're taping this, there's votes being taken at facilities across the state, but it's very disorganized. Whether that's going to be the end of the day today or tomorrow or the next day, I don't know. I'm just hopeful for a resolution. These guys get their jobs and their health insurance back. Their families need it. And we get some improvement to the working conditions there.
And there's been so much coverage of this, and we're going to talk about the budget and some other issues. But time and time again, we have viewers that write in and say, how can we impeach Governor Hochul? But I think this all goes back to what you were saying earlier. This is what happens when there's one-party rule and votes matter.
It's one-party rule. We are, unfortunately, are in a state that's more than 2-to-1 Democrat. Right now in the state, just in voter registrations, I think the non-party affiliated so-called blank voters outnumber the Republican Party in the state. So that's probably, just in the legislature alone, we're outnumbered 2-to-1 in both houses of the legislature. There's no actions on impeachment when that's the situation. And there's no real criminal activity being alleged here. It's just frustration.
That's all it is, frustration.
With the agenda and the lack of attention to things like the HALT Act and this. But it was a little different under Andrew Cuomo because Andrew Cuomo had a bunch of allegations against him on things, and they ultimately voluntarily stepped down. But even then, I don't think impeachment was moving forward at that point.
I don't either. You mean Mayor Cuomo? I'm just kidding. You said the word frustration, and you mentioned how lopsided it is in Albany. Do you get frustrated?
Every day.
Yep, I would assume so.
Every day, Frank. We're fighting the fight.
You are.
As I say, we're on the right side of the issue. Certainly for the way the residents of the southern tier and the Finger Lakes think. But what concerns me is that we have legislators in the Senate and in the Assembly that get reelected time after time that are in support of these issues that have been passed and created these problems that we have, these pro-criminal policies, yet they keep getting reelected overwhelmingly. So that tells me a lot about the constituency that they're representing, and that's very concerning that that's more than 2-to-1 the thinking of the state. We've got a lot of concerns.
Well, I know when they were talking about involuntary commitment, and Governor Hochul looked like she was going to maybe support it, and Carl Hastie basically said, it's not going to happen. There's that much power from the far left in Albany that even Governor Hochul obviously is running scared of the far left. It's frustrating.
And one thing, let me give Governor Hochul some credit here. In the past couple of years, and even in this year's budget, she has put more resources towards mental health. And this is like a next step to do the involuntary commitment because mental health is a huge issue with the homelessness that we have, and the mental health combined with the addictions and the dual diagnosis. There needs to be a stronger mechanism to get these people, these individuals, the treatment that they need at a time when they can't comprehend and to know that they need it for themselves.
I agree. And you mentioned the budget. Let's talk about Hochul's budget. $250 billion. Seems like a lot.
Seems like a lot. It is a lot. It is a lot. There's the spending. I hate to go back to the one-party control again, but the spending since since we lost the election in 2008, they set up one-party control. The budget that was passed in 2019. So since 2018, spending has gone up over 70% in New York State. It's unsustainable. It's just run rampant, and come up with a $252 billion budget. $18 billion more than last year's budget, and that's before the legislative majorities get their hands on it, which we're going to see next week. The Senate and the Assembly are going to come out with their one-house budgets, we call them, that will be their budget resolution in response to the executive budget. As I said, we just went through the month of budget hearings, listened to all this for a month. The majorities will formulate what their response to the governor's budget is. We will then formulate our responses in the minority on that. We'll debate the one-house budget some point next week, and then we'll move forward towards the next couple of weeks of trying to resolve and get a three-way budget between the Assembly, the Senate, and the Executive by the deadline of April 1st. But regardless of what the outcome is, the spending is out of control.
Yeah, it's not sustainable. Yeah. I mean, I don't even, like, and you mentioned, and there is some very good things in there for mental health, but there better be a couple good things in there with a quarter of $1 trillion.
Trust me, there's a lot of good things in there.
That kind of money.
There's education funding. There's well, you look at it, one of the ones we just had a big rally on this week that Phil Palmisano and I have been leaders on for years is the local roads funding, CHIPS funding, zero increase to that local roads program in this year's budget. It's been flat for 2 years prior to this now. Last year, the governor actually cut it in her initial budget. We were able to restore it, but just to flat. We're asking for another $250 million. On the state road side of the equation here, the governor in her executive budget has put an additional $800 million in just for inflationary increases because of the costs of this type of construction. Well, our local roads inflation has been just the same for that type of work. So we had a great rally. We had 700 and some highway superintendents from around
orange
the state.
Shirts,
all wearing their orange shirts. It's a great day. It's one of my favorite days in Albany throughout the year. And Phil and I have been very successful on this over the years and increasing funding. We have had some good increases. The last couple of years have been more frustrating, and certainly we haven't had as much success since it's been one party control, but we're still pushing. These guys need it, and this has been a bad winter, and we're going to see it. We haven't seen the worst of it yet, because when the thawing starts to happen and we go back and forth here for the next month, these potholes are really going to emerge a lot worse than they already are.
And at the press conference that you held recently on this exact issue, I believe it was you who said, and I think it's such a great point, you alluded to it there, but when you get a 0% increase with the inflation, it's a loss. We're losing money.
Yeah.
I mean, how do we maintain? They must be so frustrated when you meet with them at Albany.
They're frustrated, and these local departments do such a great job with as little as they get.
Yes.
And a high percentage of our more rural towns and villages, that's all they have for their local road budget is the money they get through CHIPS.
Right.
They don't get anything else. So if they don't get that, so if it stays flat with inflation, they're able to do less and less every year. It means we just fall farther and farther behind on the condition of our roads.
And I know you've said it and so many others, you start to point to the wastes of money in the budget that could go to this. We talk about the Hollywood tax credit. The one that sticks in my mind, and I don't understand it, maybe you can explain it, that the governor is proposing, I think it's $13.5 million to ban cell phones in schools. How's that not free?
Yeah.
To ban cell phone, why do you need 13.5?
And we're hearing from a lot of superintendents and even teachers, why can't we just get one of those shoe racks you have in your closet at home? Because we've seen them, and some classrooms are using those. There has been an ability of teachers and administrators in our local schools to have cell phone policies over the years. There is some pushback from parents wanting access, and there are some local issues on how far you want to go with that, when you want to lock them up all day long or just during the class period or whatever. I think there should be some local control over that. I do think cell phones are an issue in school. Don't get me wrong, that is a problem. It's a problem with it's just being a distraction, but also a lot of the bullying stuff that goes on that way too, unfortunately. So it's just the nature of social media, but it's extremely distracting, and trying to get kids of a variety of ages to pay attention is hard enough.
Yeah, right.
Without that. But yeah, let's put some of these shoe racks up and do that. But 13 million? No, I think it's better off having 13 million spent somewhere else. But on the inflationary side of things, the bulk of our school districts are only getting a flat 3% increase. That's not keeping up with inflation in our schools. So that's a problem there for a lot of our rural schools. And that, remember, we had the big fight last year on Save Harmless and the loss of student population. But you know what? If you got 32 kids in the class or 28 kids in the class, you still got to heat that classroom.
Exactly.
So it's not just like a straight dollar per kid reduction. And there's inflationary concerns that happens, and we have a lot of low wealth issues in our districts.
Of course.
And not unique to us or anywhere in the state, but there's a lot of mental health issues and special needs going on through our schools too that add a lot of intense cost from year to year fluctuations.
Well, let's tie that in then, since we're talking about schools. How is the EV bus mandate ever going to come to fruition? The grid's not there. The cost seems insurmountable when we look at our school budgets that are already so high. Is there any chance, because I heard yesterday, don't quote me, it might have been on the Hill, but that some Democrats are actually signing on to maybe slowing down on this?
Yeah, well, we've been calling for pumping the brakes. We've been calling it slam on the brakes.
Yeah, exactly.
This is just a wrong-headed idea. We talk about unfunded mandates in Albany.
Yeah.
This will be the biggest unfunded mandate to hit our local schools ever.
Yes.
And there's very limited funding that the state has offered, a pittance really towards what the total cost will be.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the grid. The grid isn't up to the task of providing the power to the bus garages that it needs. I mean, we're hearing from school districts it's going to be $10+ million. They're being told by NYSEG just to run the necessary transmission line to the bus garage. That's not the charging infrastructure. That's not the new buses. And that's going to be put on the local property taxpayers.
Yeah. What happens if they turn it down? Because that's still supposed to be up to us.
We can't get a straight answer on that. We've asked that over and over for several years now. We're seeing some chinks in the program for not just electric school buses, but the whole CLCPA climate electrification issues that are just unrealistic. And in utopia, it's great. We have zero emissions, and we have all the power we need.
No one's in prison.
We don't live in utopia. And that reality is starting to hit home on these deadlines because there is no plan. There's been no cost-benefit analysis.
No.
All they did is said 2030 will be here, 2040 will be here, and with no way to get there. You don't just get to zero.
No.
And they're counting on technologies to get us there that don't exist yet.
Aren't there?
Yeah.
And I know Phil's talked about it a lot as well, that when you look at the cost overall, and then obviously we're in a rural district, but in some scenarios in the rural area, what are you going to need? 2 buses for 1 bus route?
That's what we're hearing from superintendents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And does that mean the end of away games?
Yeah. I mean, what do they do?
Yeah.
Field trips, away games? Or you're going to be, because at the end of this, and they got to start buying the buses in 27.
Yeah.
By 35, they have to have only electric buses.
Yeah.
So not even no provision to keep a few diesel buses on so you can make that long haul.
Right.
It makes no sense in a lot of the districts that I represent with the larger geographic territories. And why are we making school districts do this faster than municipalities, than urban transit systems? Why, where that congestion is really where the priority should be. Because we can get our emissions, we have 0.4% of emissions globally in New York State.
Yeah.
We can get to zero. We can't get to zero, but if we could get to zero, we would have zero impact on the supposed climate issues that we're dealing with because of the greenhouse gases emissions. They're going to have no effect on that. So really, we're waiting to see somebody to explain to us what's the benefit really going to be to New Yorkers by going through all this expense. We're seeing it in the cost of utilities, but we are seeing some chinks in the program. The governor even said recently that the EV bus mandate is aspirational.
It's
not actually coming out and saying we're actually going to put it off and be realistic here, but it's an acknowledgement that it's kind of pie in the sky. nice thing to do. Lower emissions, absolutely. But we should be focusing on the emissions in areas where it's actually going to make an impact. 'Cause we're not going to change climate globally. We're not going to change it here, but no matter what we do in New York. By lowering emissions, you might change some of the factors that cause asthma in certain communities.
Sure.
But those are urban communities where there's a concentration of this, and that's where we should be focusing initially.
Right.
And then as time goes on, look, this stuff will get better, it'll get more effective, it'll get more affordable. But to do it in 2 years,
2 years.
It's
and if you look at the goal 2035, people don't realize sometimes how quickly, it's a blink of an eye, how 10 years can go by.
it's amazing.
I hope I don't
how
have to
fast
get a
it
new
goes.
car in 10 years.
Yeah,
Right?
I know.
Not going to probably happen. But it's policies like this, and I mentioned earlier the viewers that talk about impeachment, but it's all this combined that has created this mass exodus. Because every day it seems like, and you know it, you hear it every day, we'll have someone on this program saying, hey, thanks for watching, thanks for letting me watch, but I'm moving. I can't afford it anymore.
No, I get it in my office all the time,
Yeah, I'm sure.
the hundreds of emails that we get, the frustration level of people. Affordability is certainly a big aspect of that, but opportunity or lack thereof is another aspect of that, which is driven by the unaffordable business climate that we have in New York State, but it's also just a loss of freedom aspect that people more like us,
Yes.
let me just put it that way, in the areas that I represent, are strong believers in freedom and liberty.
That's for sure.
The parties in control in New York State, apparently not so much. But just issues like the Second Amendment, but other issues of liberty and freedom is causing people to leave the state.
And you mentioned business climate. Think of that with the Climate Change Super Fund. You have all these businesses that followed the red tape and all the bureaucracy and did everything right, and then 10 years later they're coming back and saying you owe us billions of dollars. Why would any business come here?
Billions of dollars for providing fossil fuels that we couldn't live without.
Exactly.
How would we heat our homes?
Yeah.
How would we drive our cars? How would commerce operate with no transportation?
Right.
This is not going to hold up.
No.
It's going to be in court for decades. But there's another prong to this, cap and invest, that's out there that the legislature passed as well a couple years ago. The governor kind of put the brakes on that earlier this year because the different agencies were supposed to have come up with proposed rules and regulations by this January, just a month ago. And they didn't. The governor came out in January and said, oh, I want you to have those in by next January, which was a signal like, oh, this thing's off for a year. Yeah, well, and then the rule and regulation process takes a year.
Yeah.
You know what that gets you past? November of 26, the next governor's election.
Oh, hey.
Before any of these costs, because they're going to add costs across the board to any business that emits from fossil fuels. All their costs are going to go up, and we're all going to be footing the bill for that.
We pay it, and I know you've had to deal with this in your office, and I get complaints every day on this program about the people's energy bills.
People's energy bills. The situation with NYSEG right now is really out of control. We're getting inundated. In my office, we had a press conference on this in Albany just last week. I've spoken directly to NYSEG. I've spoken to the Public Service Commission. We're asking for answers. Everybody's pointing the finger. It's this, it's that, it's the other thing. None of them, all the excuses are coming up with them. None of them combined add up to these increases that people are seeing in their bills of 200, 300, 400% with no change in their utility usage. I mean, we've got people whose utility bills have gone through the roof when they heat with fuel oil or with wood pellets. So they're turning their lights on and off the same as they always have, and all of a sudden their bills have tripled. It doesn't make sense. We're not getting straight answers, and we're fighting to get to the answers we need. But let me tell you, it's frustrating as people are panicking because they're getting these huge bills.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about life-changing money for some people.
Absolutely.
When you have a budget, especially kind of our elderly population that live on a limited income, that can really make or break your year.
If you're used to a $150 to $250 bill a month on your utility, you got that baked into your budget, and a $1,500, $2,500 bill shows up, you panic. And it's coming through with the calls to my office, my staff trying to help everybody out, trying to get them answers from NYSEG, and at least get some hold off on this, because people can't pay these bills.
They can't afford
them. They can't pay them. But factor on this that nobody's really, at least the powers that be, are admitting to is, and it's not all driven by the CLCPA and the climate electrification initiatives now, but that's a portion of it, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. It's going to be far worse coming forward. There was a 32 roughly % increase in NYSEG delivery charges that went in a year and a half ago, which is just finished being phased in now. But now, I hate to tell your viewers this, but this month is coming another fee on your bill of $10 a month for the securitization of winter storm and ice storm events that happened in past years that the Public Service Commission had not allowed the utility companies to recoup those costs. So that the utilities have been sitting on them, holding them, and it's been affecting their borrowing costs. And they finally got authority to securitize that, to basically bond it and pay it over a long period of time. But the way they pay for that is the Public Service Commission approves a rate that they add on. And one more surcharge on the bill, just to add insult to injury. It's a very difficult situation, and nobody's looking, at least that is in charge here in this state, is looking at the real aspects of affordability of this whole CLCPA electrification initiative.
Senator Tom O'Meara has been our guest. Tom, I kept you kind of late. I'm so glad you gave us so much time this morning.
Well, glad to be with you. I don't get in here often enough.
No, come on in anytime. You know that. But I think our moral of the story today is this is what happens when it's one-party rule, right?
Yeah. No, it is. We're struggling with that. You know what? I love the fight. Yep. And I said with my colleague, we got a great team up there. We're all rowing in the same direction. Yep. Listen, we win every debate on the floor of the Senate. That's right. And my colleagues in the Assembly. And we lose every vote 2-1. I mean, so is that frustrating?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. But we're on the right side of the issues, and we're just trying to get them to open their eyes and see it. And sooner or later, at least on this electrification stuff, it's going to come home to roost. And I just hope not too much damage is done before that's there, because there's a lot of hysteria, and we're seeing a lot of businesses leave the state because of that uncertainty.
I agree. Senator Tom O'Meara has been our guest. Thanks, Tom. We'll talk again soon.
All right, Frank. Thanks.
All right. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking.